prepared. Great, so this is our fourth Digital Fund monthly learning event. This month we are focusing on the theme of what's been hard. So that's obviously quite an open topic, and yeah, I'm going to be interested to see the different themes that come out of that. Last month we focused on what is essential, and we heard from our support partners, Dot Project, Shift and Cast, talking about what they've seen across the Digital Fund cohort and across kind of the civil society sector, what they've seen, and actually Kirsty's here from Dot Project. So we heard about what they've seen as patterns across charities and civil society organizations, what's essential in responding to and adapting to the new conditions brought by COVID. And this month we're focusing on what is hard, what are the challenges that have been coming up, what's hard that maybe wasn't expected to be hard, and what was hard before and might have just become worse in the current conditions. And I'm really excited. We've got Ben from Relate, Janine from BANES, which is stands for a really long, I always mess this up. I would say Bath and Northern Somerset Carer Centre. So I've got it. Or I think in some confirmation, and Kerry from National Ugly Mugs joining us today. I was going to suggest that we start with a short check-in, and I think we should still do that, even though with quite a small group. I don't think we're quite small enough to do a kind of all-round check-in. So I'm going to split us up into groups of 3 and do breakout rooms. And in the breakout rooms, if you just want to actually, there's going to be some groups of 2, so groups of 3 and 2. And if you want to just check in with where have you been finding resilience? Where have you been finding resilience in recent times? And we'll just do that for 6 minutes and come back and then kick off. So you should find an invitation to join a room. Welcome back. How was your check-in?
Yeah, it was good.
What was there any common themes?
I think seeing kind of support and resilience from our teams was a common theme.
Yeah. Reassurance.
Mm.
Go back.
Oh, welcome back.
Hello.
I always feel like it's really good to do that, because actually we had like 4 or 5 people arrive and kind of pop back out and back in. So great. Maybe if you want to share like any common patterns or insights of things that you shared in your check-in in the chat, would be great to hear about how you are all finding resilience in these times. And that's kind of topical with what we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, let's go on to our panelists. So really excited to have Ben, Kerry and Janine here with us today. All of our grant holders we've just been really impressed at the Digital Fund cohort group at how much we're seeing our grant holders kind of weather the challenges of this time. And actually many of them are using a lot of these challenges or limitations or the constraints of how we've had to change the way we're living and working to their advantage, or maybe that's a weird way of putting it, but I've just been really impressed at how much pivoting and innovation and creativity and resilience and reports of really putting well-being at the center of all of this. And it's just really inspiring and really encouraging. So really excited to hear from the group today. I'm going to start with handing to Janine. Maybe Janine, you could start by just introducing yourself, introducing BANES, and if there's any kind of opening comments you'd like to make on the topic of what's been hard. We'll start with you, and then we'll pass to Ben, and then we'll pass to Kerry.
So I was hoping you'd start with someone else so that I could sort of copy what someone else did, but that's fine. So my name's Janine. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at the Carer Centre in Bath in North East Somerset. It is a real mouthful, Phoebe. And we are a local organisation supporting unpaid carers. So that's any unpaid carer from the age of 5 up. And we offer a whole range of services in order to support carers with their wellbeing, help them feel in control of their caring situation, and to keep them connected both to others and to their community. And the Digital Fund project is although it kind of covers a little bit of everything that we do, there's a big focus on how it can help us to better engage the communities that live around carers, to enable them to support carers and the people they care for, to embed that sense of a caring community within BANES so that it becomes more sustainable. Because I won't go into a whole host of facts and figures as to why, but basically if the situation carries on as it is, unpaid carers will reach breaking point, and they're actually, they deserve more than that, frankly. And embedding that support within our communities is a key way that we feel we can deliver more and better support to the carers who we're serving. So that's our Digital Fund project. And we haven't done as much on it as we would have liked because of the COVID situation. It's kind of had to pause a lot of recruitment and a lot of the kind of research elements that we were looking at in the discovery phase, but we have been doing some stuff, which has been great to feel like we have been moving forward in a new way, even at a time of crisis. When I think about what's been hard, it would be easier to say what's been not hard. But to go with some headlines, it's been really hard working in a small team, actually, because our resources are really limited. And at the start of the crisis, a number of people had left and we were expecting to re-recruit, and now it just wasn't the right time at that point to re-recruit. So we've been juggling and holding a lot more things than we expected to. And that's made even more difficult when you're in a team of what is essentially now a full-time equivalent of 10, kind of juggling that alongside childcare and all those other things that everyone else is kind of struggling with. So that's been hard. And another kind of, I guess, starter for 10 about what we as an organisation have particularly found hard. And we found that echoed back through a lot of the learning that we've been doing with other partners through another National Lottery fund, the Building Connections Fund. What we found hard and challenging is the lack of digital engagement around our stakeholders. So it's all very well us as a staff team going, hey, we know how to use Zoom, we know how to do this with the website, we can run off and create a chat bot, we could do X, we could do Y. But the fundamental fact is more than 50% of our carers are essentially not online or not accessing services online. 30% of our stakeholders are over 70. And that's not to say that all of them are digitally excluded, but a significant proportion are. And that's a real challenge when you're looking at how to serve them at a time like this, and kind of moving forward if we're looking at digital services, because that's not going to change overnight, frankly. So I'm going to stop there because otherwise I could talk forever about that as a challenge. But that's kind of really for us, that's been a key around what's been hard.
Thank you so much, Janine. Really good kind of opening thoughts, and we'll tease out some more of those themes. But thanks for going first as well. Yeah, it's not fun being the first. Ben, over to you.
Hi everybody, I'm Ben from Relate. I'm Director of Services. Just for those of you who don't know who we are, so we're a relationship support organisation. I guess best known for counselling. Possibly less known is that we counsel both adults and children. So we saw about I guess 80,000 people last year, and we try to look at the relationship support as both an individual interactions and not just about intimate partners, but kind of like how we're all getting on with each other. How can you take some of that sort of learning and lessons and enable organisations to think differently and work together, and we try and influence national policy and try and influence government in how they represent relationships in what's going on. So that's sort of us. Our digital fund project really started, I guess, by thinking, so we, as I say, we saw about 80,000 people face to face last year, but we had about 4 million people come to the website. And about 1.9 million of those people sort of did the thing on the website. So either use the information or use some of the resources that we got there. And that really sort of drove us to thinking, what should we and what could we be doing to better support those individuals? So, counselling is a fairly long term and it requires a lot of time and investment and energy and money. So there must be better ways, mustn't there, in which we can sort of achieve our mission around relationships and work with that group of people that are coming to us digitally or certainly online. So really, what we were trying to do was to figure out different ways in which we could talk to people and listen to people that we don't necessarily talk to on a day-to-day basis, and what could we come up with as ways to enhance and get relationship support out there in different ways. I mean, what's been hard, what's been interesting in this sort of transition? So, I think lots of us trying to make the digital conversation relevant. And as you just said, Janine, it's that kind of bit about what do people understand by digital, and in Relate, that really meant just not being in the room with someone. So we used to talk about things like, we still do talk about things like telephone being a digital offer. And we were really trying to sort of change that view for people. So, overnight we switched pretty much overnight, within 2 weeks, we switched our entire delivery to being delivered via webcam or via telephone. And, like many of us, amazed, proud, all the other kind of sort of adjectives and emotions about, how, the best part of 800 practitioners, I guess, across the country have kind of managed to switch to a different way of working. So that's been extraordinary. I guess my nervousness as Director of Services is I really couldn't tell you, how well we're doing that. So we've switched delivery, but what's interesting, I guess, is it the same, or is it different? There's certainly sort of expectations, I think, that people are starting to express about it being a different kind of experience and therefore wanting a different something out of it. We're sort of lost, we're not as close to our staff, and so how do we kind of connect with them? How do we find the right ways to support them? This is a very different way of working. We were talking on the call, in our group about sort of resilience and the new pressures of Zoom, and so how do practitioners respond to that too in a different sort of way? So there's some challenges for us in all of that. And I guess, in effect, it feels like we're running at least two organisations at the moment. We're running the old organisation. We're running a new thing, a different thing. They keep colliding with each other. Certainly the workload feels as though it's doubled, and it's kind of how do we know what to do next, really? So the uncertainty about things like sort of lockdown and the impacts of that, and trying to plan, when do we say to people it might be okay to go back into the office? What do we know as being the pressures for relationships and so on? So there's so many different things, and we'll come on to, won't we, later in the conversation, just what wasn't very good or very strong in the first place. Boy, has that been sort of highlighted as being a real weakness now. So it's kind of sort of juggling all of those different things. So I think that's enough from me.
Thank you, Ben. Really interesting. It's like quite different, a different perspective to what you brought in, Janine. But these themes have been coming up across the cohort of grant holders, and I can share more about those insights from the learning and the kind of type forms that we get each month. So passing to Kerry to finish us off with the introductions.
Thank you, Phoebe. Hi, everyone. My name's Kerry. I work for National Ugly Mugs. I'm the Chief Operations Officer. So we are a sex worker serving charity. So we work with both on and off street sex workers. We have a membership of over 7,000, and more than 80% of those identify as individual sex workers. The rest is made up of organisations supporting sex workers. We have that membership so that those who don't have digital access can benefit from what we do. We are a digital charity. We don't do face-to-face, we do person-to-person through digital, and like Ben said before, that includes phones. So it's quite a mindset to say to people, you know, digital means picking up the phone as well. You are digital, you can use a phone. So we provide safety and support for sex workers who are victims of crime. And we receive about 1,000 reports each year from sex workers who've been a victim of crime. We produce safety information that goes back out to the community from those reports as a preventative measure. And we support people who want to access the criminal justice system or access other support services throughout the UK. So we have quite a small team, full-time equivalent of 8, and we work nationally. So we're always at capacity anyway. So in terms of the difference that COVID-19 has made to us, we're kind of delivering what feels like a brand new service. So where we were supporting people as victims of crime, what's happened is our membership is now coming to us and saying, you know, we want to self-isolate, but we have no income. We can't access the schemes that are available through the government. So we've been providing like food and hygiene resources to people, referrals to food banks, helping people with universal credit. So it feels like we're still doing the victims of crime because people are still working, unfortunately, you know, where we've got parents, single parents, students, people with debts, people with no access to public funds. They cannot access these schemes. So what they're coming to us now saying is, you know, if I don't work, I can't afford to eat. So we're having to deliver 2 services. And I think that's been quite hard in terms of 8 full-time equivalent staff, over 7,000 members. Our reach is about 25,000 sex workers, and we're having to do both at the minute. For those who unfortunately don't have those options and are continuing to work, they are being hard targeted by perpetrators who know that there is no chance that they would ever seek support or report to police in the current pandemic situation. So in terms of that, there's lots of things we'll discuss about what's been hard. I think my biggest concern is with what's coming in the future with austerity measures, and, you know, we think it's been hard. Is it going to get even harder? So how do we plan for that? We know that the funding landscape is unpredictable right now. We see lots of even the big charities where they're making people redundant. There's limited opportunities for fundraising. So I think we're just concerned about what's going to be even harder going forward. Sorry, so that's from me. No happy high notes there. But
That's all right.
we chatted a little bit in the group about resilience, and I think for me, the team that we have been incredibly resilient, and so proud of them in what they've done and what they're delivering right now. But equally our beneficiaries, they are such resilient people. You know, we all serve people who are marginalised, left out of policy, targeted in different ways, and they are really resilient, and I think we can learn a lot from our beneficiaries as well.
Thank you. I know that the topic of this webinar is not it's not a kind of naturally positive one, is it? But I think, yeah, as you say, through sharing, you know, what's been hard, we're hoping that that can also build a sense of community and just, you know, help us highlight what is hard, so that as funders and, you know, working on policy, we can try and orient the funder space as better meeting those things. But I agree, it's definitely not a light and happy topic, but yeah, really grateful that you're all willing to share about your experiences. So if we move into questions, I've just noted a couple of the things down that have been coming up. So you've mentioned kind of digital exclusion. It's difficult to reach beneficiaries who don't have access to digital, and I've heard that a lot from across the cohort. especially with the children's charities, actually, that a lot of the most vulnerable children have gone completely silent, and there's no way to access supporting those families and people. And yeah, some of the charities and the digital fund are having to be really creative about kind of leaving like colouring books on doorsteps and packages and, you know, all sorts of different things. You've also mentioned just like the pressure of moving an organisation online, and you know, we thought that it would be possible to do back-to-back 8 hours of Zoom, but actually people are really burning out, and it's a very different kind of tiredness. So how do we kind of develop new well-being practices when part of well-being is connecting with people, but then when you connect too much with people on Zoom, you feel really tired. So it's this paradox of how to do that. And then I think you also mentioned, Ben, just like the feeling of the team being distanced online, and like all of the impacts that going online have on team cohesion and working together. And then Kerry, you also mentioned just like the general like uncertainty of this time and the upcoming, you know, austerity and the difficulty, like limitations to the fundraising, and then just overall there's just all this added pressure on beneficiaries and vulnerable people. So I think it's really good to bring up all of this, because it's I don't think we as a sector like to talk too much about how hard it actually is, and how much people are under pressure. If you think back to what was hard, what was hard before lockdown, and what has become more hard, could we kind of start by talking about that? Are there things that have become worse in lockdown? Are there things that actually may have become easier in lockdown and with what's happened in the last few months? I'll leave it up to the three of you who would like to jump in first, but just thinking over the last kind of 3 or 4 months, what are the trends of what has become harder, what's become more challenging, and what has become potentially less challenging? Maybe there's a few things that have eased up in the last few months.
Happy to jump in there, nobody else minds. I think in terms of what's been harder is we all work with groups who are, you know, frequently left out of policy, frequently left out of resources, and I think with COVID that's been exacerbated. So whereas it's always hard, we work for charities, we're serving populations, I think seeing them left out of any supports available through the pandemic is just another kind of knock. It's what drives us forward, but also it's just another knock again that these people are left out once more. A lot of the government stuff that became available was for businesses, and then, you know, a few weeks in, there was that recognition of the third sector, but, you know, very little recognition of that. So I think that's really hard, that we do that work anyway, but now it's even harder, and again, our beneficiaries are left out of these policies and these resources. So I don't know if everybody else feels the same in terms of their beneficiaries, but I found that hard. In terms of what's been easier, I think the third sector has come together a little bit more during the pandemic. We've got each other, we are connecting digitally, you know, where you had to travel to a meeting and it was a 2-hour train ride, and, you know, you got there and it was great, everybody loved networking, but the capacity to attend those networking events or those meetings was really difficult, and I think got really difficult in sector. So having them online makes it much easier to connect. So I found that easier, feeling more connected with other organisations. And I'll let anybody else jump in if they want to on that one.
I think I would definitely echo what you're saying about what I feel has become easier is that kind of like collaboration and connection with others. But kind of weirdly, on the flip side, at the start of the pandemic, like I actually found that harder, because I found like a lot of organisations, like ours included, I'm not like we absolutely did this, we kind of just went really introverted because we were like, oh my God, how are we going to survive? What are we going to do? And then for us, because we rely on other organisations referring into us, it became like really stark and really marked that everyone had just kind of internalised, because we were just getting no referrals of carers. And we know that the number of carers is increasing. I don't know if you saw the latest stuff that came out in Carers Week, but according to the latest research, the number of carers across the country has gone up by 4.5 million through COVID, which is about a 50% increase. So like, we know that carers are going up, yet our referrals were going down, and that's kind of been an unexpected challenge. And I think that's because everyone has like it's so difficult for everyone. I'm not trying to like knock our partners, because it's so difficult. Like, how do you keep your organisation growing and getting stronger and kind of moving forward at the same time as, you know, learning and collaborating and kind of remembering all of the partners around you who you need to kind of, you know, work with as well. It's just so much going on and so much that is having to be juggled. But what has kind of become easier, I guess, to kind of echo Kerry, is I feel that like it was maybe a bit of a curve, and like once we kind of, certainly in Baines, once everything got like a tiny bit easier and we kind of saw a tiny understanding of the path that we had to go, people started to pop up again. And like we have now had some learning events within kind of within the area, which were just like amazing, just to kind of go on a screen and go, it's really tough. Like, are you finding it tough too? And people going, yeah, it was so tough. And that was just, even just that sense of like, oh, you know, it's not just us that are finding this really difficult. This is everyone, you know, it's okay. We're in this boat together. Like kind of that then kind of became easier. So yeah, I kind of like echo your journey really there, I think, Kerry.
Yeah, I think I would echo everything that's been said. I mean, just a couple of sort of extra things from our perspective, and probably resonate very strongly with what Kerry's talking about. So we've seen a significant uplift in sort of inquiries around domestic abuse, and trying to respond to that effectively in essentially just an online way for an organisation that's very used to kind of being able to have a safe space that's the counselling room, you know, being able to control a lot of the conversation and stuff, so not being able to do that and having to sort of shift the, I guess it's the power relationship, you know, so there's a whole load of sort of implicit assumptions actually with counselling. You know, you do a lot for the client to set up the sort of the safe space and the relationship, and suddenly you can't do all of that. And you know, how that interplays with kind of trying to keep people safe in a domestic abuse scenario has been really complex, and we've sort of struggled with that, you know, to try and respond appropriately. I guess a couple of other things. I mean, one of the interesting things for us in terms of moving online is the sort of move away from geographic concentrations. So as a national organisation, we, you know, again, it's been very sort of physically located in communities and in buildings and things. And obviously we no longer have that kind of feta, if you like. But we've switched from being lots of waiting lists and lots of kind of challenges in terms of being able to meet demand to suddenly being able to, we've got too much supply. You know, so we've got practitioners who aren't being fully utilised, and so in terms of our ability to respond to demand, it's been great. But the sort of flip side of that is those challenges around use of furlough and all sorts of things that kind of, you know, makes it a very uncertain place for people in the organisation. So again, that you know, how do we keep motivation up? How do we kind of keep a staff group sort of interested and engaged at a time when, you know, as you've referred to Phoebe, the sort of the sector dialogue is a really depressing one in some cases, isn't it? The stuff that the media choose to dial up is all about kind of, you know, sort of, and it's these big numbers that people are talking about, you know, so what's going to happen to the charitable sector and things. So meantime, you're talking to your staff team and saying, it's fantastic, you've made these switches, we've got loads of demand for people, for the services and stuff, we're needed more than ever. And yet the media are saying, you're all doomed, kind of thing. So trying to sort of manage that challenge, that tension, I think, within the staff team has been really tricky. But it's a good, being able to respond in a very different way to clients has just been fantastic.
Thanks a lot for sharing. if just thinking, there's already just in the last like 20 minutes, we've already shared there's such a landscape of the challenges, and it does, I can imagine it feels quite overwhelming. I mean, as a funder in the space, it's also just overwhelming to be thinking about how best to orient and where is funding needed most, and how to do that strategically. What are ways that you think these challenges could be made easier? What are the things, what are your needs, would you say, or like in the face of all this stuff that is hard, if you had to choose three things that would make things significantly easier, what would those be? And obviously that's hard to adding a hard thing to a hard situation. It's hard to put it down to just three, and that might just be more funding in a really basic sense. But over to you if you've got any. Doesn't need to be perfect, just to kick off the conversation around that.
Three things. I think what I find hard as a COO is my job to plan for the future, but actually I've got no idea what the future is. And generally, you run your service and everybody's doing the day-to-day, they know what they're doing, and you have that opportunity in that space to plan for the future. I think because it came so quickly, I've spent the last 3 months focusing on setting people up on the day-to-day and doing that firefighting day-to-day in terms of how operations work. So I feel a little bit on the back foot in terms of what the future looks like, but also we've got no idea what the future looks like. So it's really difficult to plan for that. And not just about funding, what does the future look like for our beneficiaries? We don't know what that is. So it's the unknown I find really difficult, and the ability to make any plans. Some days you have to just sit down, we'll plan as if everything's going to be okay and then deal with it if it's not okay. Other days you just think we've got to plan for worst case scenario. So it's splitting between the two, what is the best way to deal with that. I think the great thing is there's so many digital tools available now, whereas maybe they were there, but you had to go looking for them and you had to learn how to use them. I think it's actually been, thrown down us. It pings up in all our emails at the minute, hey, there's this tool and this is how you use it. And if you need any help, jump on here. So that's been really good that there's more resources around digital, because digital is the future. And I think we're all conscious within that there are people that don't have digital as well. So how do we incorporate those? I know Janine talked a lot about people that don't have digital that they're serving. So it's about us as an organisation, what does digital transformation look like for us, but also how do we benefit the beneficiaries around digital transformation as well. And I know there's some good things popping up in the chat about Wi-Fi and digital there. So it's not just about the organisation, it's about the beneficiaries and how they use digital and how we can give them the skills that they need. So that's 2 hard things. I'll let anyone else jump in on a 3.
I think something, I don't know if this is possible, but anyway, I'm going to say it. I think what would make it a bit easier, it was feeling like someone else had the back of our beneficiaries. And I feel like, I kind of hear that through you, Kerry, as well, but kind of like through the whole pandemic, something that we've really been feeling is that carers have got lost, because the term carer, probably if you asked everyone on the screen, we'd all have a slightly different interpretation of that. And when you're an unpaid carer and you've got everyone in your street going out to bang their saucepans for the NHS, don't get me wrong, the NHS are awesome, but how does that make you feel? Because you're doing it for nothing. and also it's kind of mixing the message of what is a carer and who are the carers who need support. Is it paid carers? Is it unpaid carers? What does that mean? What does that look like? And there was a brilliant blog post by the head of the Carers Trust about the government basically taking advantage of unpaid carers and trying to do that more through this pandemic, and using it as an excuse to lever more out of people who are not getting paid for it and are actually suffering as a result through their own well-being. And I feel like this is personal, but I think it would probably be said of everyone kind of around the table around your beneficiaries, but like, I feel like, who are the people banging the drum for carers? Like, who's there to support carers? Because we're here, but we're in Baines and we're quite small, and yes, we've got a few large organisations, but like, our voices feel like they're not being heard. Whereas, like, Virgin Atlantic, like, all over the news that they need XYZ support. I'm not knocking Richard Branson, sorry, I don't want to get political, but like, what all of the news is about, like the economy, and the economy needs help. And I'm like, yeah, but what about all of these people, like, who genuinely need your help? Like, it's something that would make it easier would be to feel like our beneficiaries, and I'm sure everyone else's beneficiaries, were actually seen and understood, and that the needs were understood.
Thanks, Janine. I think that's a great point about the visibility of like the economy and the businesses. Like, whenever I switch on the news, I feel like I'm seeing a lot of news about businesses and small businesses and how we're going to keep the economy going. And you're right that there's very little visibility on vulnerable people who need help most. Ben, I can see you were going to jump in on.
I'm trying to sort of think of something to add rather than just kind of echo. I suppose, so there's a couple of things that have struck us in the last couple of weeks. So there's something about the, I guess, sort of, we all suddenly know that something is possible that wasn't possible kind of 3 months ago in terms of working together and partnerships and collaboration, and it's how that can translate around sort of back office functions as well. We spend probably too much of our income, if you like, sort of trying to just sort of support the infrastructure of organisations, and that's both sort of small, medium and large. And it's kind of, how does that collaboration, because that's not naturally the space that we work together in, is it? We tend to focus on finding common cause for beneficiaries, doing things together, because that's the starting point. But I think there's more of a culture shift, but more of an opportunity to free up money. If we can look at sort of different ways in which we can sort of support the backbone of the sector as much as the front end. And then sort of the second side to that is this bit about, I guess, the flow of money. And a lot of money's been chucked at the problem in the last 3 months. It's almost kind of like you feel guilty if you're not applying for a particular fund. Our inboxes are just full of the latest kind of, COVID fund for this, or sort of support fund for this. And it's all got to be out the door very quickly. So we're sort of writing bids that aren't necessarily as strategic or well thought through as they could be. So it's kind of, how do you start to both unravel that, because some of it's going to stop presumably in 6 months' time, a year's time. So there's, what's the distortion that it's created? What's the money? Where does that money where's it come from? I suppose, what's the money that won't be available in a year's time, 2 years' time, from X fund or Y fund? I know that the lottery is sort of challenged with that just as much as any other funder. And so it's taking our collaboration that we prove can be possible, taking the fact that we can all sort of think in a different way, and how can we apply that now to the way in which the money is flowing. I don't know more than that, as you said. Say it, even if it's unformed, but it's something there, isn't there? There seems to be a lot of money sloshing around all of a sudden. And it's, Janine's point is, it's not really necessarily always going to be reaching the right people. The due diligence for organisations for funders is can't be as robust. So we must be funding the same thing multiple times, mustn't we? If there are, I can't remember what the latest figure was. There's something like 15,000 COVID specific funding streams or something have been created over the last 3 months. And you there's got to be some replication in there. Anyway, I don't know where we go with that, but it's
I think that's a great point, and I'd like to kind of add to that or build on that and think about, is there something here that the sector as a whole needs to come together in ways that are just completely unprecedented? Like, should the charity sector actually look like a kind of meta organization or some sort of ecology? Because what I'm hearing, and a lot of what all of you are saying, is that there's this need for a sense of shared accountability and support that right now it just feels like there's many different organizations doing their thing, often competing for funding, don't have the whole picture view, needing to kind of orient and position next to government, and then also needing to position and orient around funding sources. And it just sounds like almost an impossible task to really know what to do that without knowing what's coming in the future, have very uncertain sources of funding, and have to do all of the user research and data analysis, like all of this stuff on not, organizations that don't always have massive capacity and aren't like mega, not like Virgin Atlantic, like mega corporations with huge teams and resources. And I just wonder whether we're setting ourselves up for like an impossible task and a lot of burnout. So I think from there, it's just, I'd be interested to hear what you think about, what could a new sector look like, or what, that's obviously quite, blue skies thinking, but what are the ways that it could be different? What would make this less hard? And what are maybe some ideas around, what that could look like? Maybe if anyone from the audience also has anything to chip in or chime in, feel free to. I'll just put the grid view on. Yeah, feel free to jump in with ideas.
Hey.
Let's start with Pascal and then Simon. And we'll come back to our panelists. We can give you a bit of a rest because you've been doing a fantastic job.
Hi. So our team works with organisations across the refugee sector. So we're working with about 40 to 50 organisations quite closely, and then our team works with about 150 organisations mainly through legal literacy and immigration advice programs. But what we find is that the organisations have been incredibly brilliant at adapting to COVID and supporting clients generally, and a lot have been able to kind of access COVID funds to buy tech, help people to kind of access digital where they can. But obviously there are the funding issues around streams running out. They're spending more money than ever around data provision for clients and keeping people online. And I think there's something strategic there around, whose responsibility is it to push the government more around access to Wi-Fi for all people who are vulnerable, rather than thousands of projects replicating just getting digital tech to certain families. So there just seems to be, that's one area where I think, and not only around advocacy, but I suppose the pushing to certain big companies around better provision or cheaper provision to people who are vulnerable, and how there are special packages, I don't know, but there seems to be lots of strategic work that could be done when a lot of organisations are doing all of this just for their clients around digital inclusion and access to these services.
Simon, do you want to?
Oh, sorry, thank you. I think kind of building on what Pascal was saying about kind of acting across the sector, I suppose my fear, and some of this is from spending quite a lot of time in the access to justice sector over the last few years, is a lot of organisations have been built more around services than around kind of user needs, and I suppose kind of holistic campaigns around user needs. And obviously that doesn't apply to every organisation, but when we're talking about service design is incredibly important, but perhaps we need to be thinking about service design that goes well beyond single organisations, and how the mesh of those services fit together to meet user benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a theme that we've been discussing a lot with the support partners, with Dot Project and Shift and Cast, because they've got a bit more of an ecosystemic view, I guess, from all of the support that they're offering across the sector and with Catalyst. And I think there's something really interesting there. And if I had to, in my best, in a perfect world, I would love it if COVID was a catalyst for some sort of complete transformation of the sector to be much more ecosystemic and as you say, Simon, a kind of meshed approach. But that needs resourcing. Like, it needs the resourcing of the kind of catalyst coordination function of a network. Networks don't just kind of come out of, I've seen a lot of self-organizing networks work quite well, but after a while there's always this need for a coordination function. So that's quite interesting. Was there anyone else who was going to jump in before I go back to some questions? Kerry, go ahead.
Just on what Simon said, I agree. We spend a lot of resources and a lot of time in the service delivery. And we have these great ideas and these great opportunities, but we just don't have the capacity to build on them going forward. It's not something that you can apply for funding for. I know there is the capacity building kind of buzzword that gets in a funding bid, but actually, you know that somebody else that's applying for money for actual service delivery is going to trump that. And I think that's where, as the third sector, we fall on the back foot, because everything we do has to be funded and there are no opportunities. So like Phoebe said, there is the Catalyst network. And, when that set up, it was quite exciting. It was all about digital. And, we've had COVID, but that's still on the go. And I do hope that is going to be a space for people to share learning, to share digital tools that work, that can be remodeled for other organisations, to become the third sector, to become a national body in its own right. Yeah, the government provided funding opportunities for businesses and commercial. That was their focus, obviously. But where is that bit for the third sector to be that national body and to support ourselves? We don't actually need the government to support us. We run quite efficient services because we're good at running efficient services. But our beneficiaries are the most amazing people that we turn to in terms of what needs to be done, what needs to be delivered, and what needs to be better for them. I also think that there are corporate companies out there, and it's really frustrating. You get your funding, you're 8 months in, you want to build a product, a digital product, takes a lot of time, and then, personally in your inbox, the clothing company that you buy clothes off have this amazing app, yeah, and it's took them maybe a few months to create this most amazing app. Share it with the third sector, please, yeah, because businesses might be in competition with each other and don't want to share that because it's about profit. But please, those corporates out there that are making money, can we push them to be sharing that learning with the third sector? Because it is a duplication. We spend money on building a digital product when actually a big corporate company's just built something absolutely amazing that we could replicate and use. So again, with the Catalyst network and the third sector being a national body, that's where we'd have a little bit more clout, I think, with the corporate world. So I do think that is the way forward for the third sector. We're going to be pushed into that because we're going to be pretty desperate to survive, and we'll call on each other. But yeah.
Thank you, Kerry.
Phoebe, just to sort of build on Simon's point and Kerry's point, really, it's one of the things that's been really refreshing has been the sort of the agile working approach that's sort of we've all needed to adopt very, very quickly, and so that was sort of part of what Relate had been kind of working its way through with the digital fund money, was kind of a different approach to life. And I guess the thing that would be helpful would be for people not to go back to old kind of grant structures and things. One of the refreshing things about the digital fund has been the very different approach to giving the money, and the sort of the way in which expectations and the structure of the grant making process and so on was very different. So that kind of agile approach, if we can retain that in sort of wider funding conversations, and so it's Simon's point, I think, if I understand correctly, about, you know, if we design things around user groups rather than around services, because the old way of awarding money forced you into a service definition before you even started. You know, you had to say, this is what we want as our output, often, not even, you know, and then there was a subsequent question about how might it benefit your beneficiaries, but it was kind of that sort of sequence. And one of the sort of, you know, having said what I've said about, you know, sort of money flowing into the centre and into the sector in a slightly sort of uncoordinated way, at least it was using a different set of behaviours. You know, so often the grant makers were having to work as quickly as everyone else has been to kind of say, so just tell us something about where this money might go, but you don't have to worry about too much detail. But if we can kind of get a better refinement and framework around that, I think that would be really powerful for all of us, and it would enable some of sort of Kerry's, you know, suggestions about who else can you introduce into this conversation, because sort of philanthropy and, you know, the sort of CSR type stuff, you know, requires a different way of measuring things, doesn't it? So if we can have that conversation more widely, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. That's something that I think we've been experimenting with at the Digital Fund in terms of the way we gave our grants, and then the way we're doing this kind of learning program instead of asking for kind of reports and doing more traditional evaluation, and the fact that it's been very flexible. And I think there are other experiments out there as well, and I think there's something to be said to telling the story of the fact that this has, I mean, hopefully so far worked well, and we've seen grant holders able to kind of pivot and respond and adapt in ways they wouldn't have been able to if the money had been attached to a specific project that, you know, maybe 5 months ago was very relevant and now would be completely irrelevant. So yeah, it's kind of a systems approach instead of a more linear and reductionist approach to funding, and also to giving services. I'm just going to refer back to see if there are any other questions before we open to questions to the audience. We've touched on kind of what's been hard about collaborating with others, like organizations and partners right now. But I'm curious what sorts of things might make it easier if we are moving into, you know, times of austerity and potentially more uncertainty and shocks and challenges. What are the things or kind of resources or opportunities that would really help you as charities to be able to have that ecosystem view and partnering and fostering collaboration and kind of strengthening the bonds of the sector?
I guess just trying to think about how to phrase what I'm trying to say. I guess I think that spaces like this, which enable you to just take an hour out of your day to kind of like reflect and think, are just like so important. And I've recognized that more and more through the crisis, actually. And like, I'm not sucking up to a funder, but I've genuinely really liked filling in the type forms, because it's the first time that I've ever been in a situation where I've kind of sat there and thought, what do I think is essential? Like what has been really important over the last few months? And like that's actually had a genuine impact in terms of the way that we've kind of like tweaked and changed a few things across the organisation moving forward. And so, yeah, I think my kind of reflections sort of through the way that I'm very kind of, I am very targets driven. I am kind of very now, yesterday. And I can therefore be bad at reflection because I kind of want to move on to the next thing. But actually, in terms of kind of like collaborating and kind of thinking more systemically and understanding what the best next step is, being forced to reflect, and being forced to force is the wrong word because that makes it sound like I don't want to do it, but kind of having the time and space to come into spaces like this and kind of others that we've got more locally have been so beneficial in making sure that the decisions that we're making moving forward are kind of strategic. And I think quite often these sort of learning spaces get not forgotten, but they don't get funded. And also, like for me personally, before the COVID, they certainly weren't something which I would have prioritised. Whereas actually now I'm kind of a bit of an evangelist for how important they are. I'm wanting all of kind of like our kind of management team to have some form of space where they can kind of learn and reflect. So I think this is kind of, for me, this is quite a key part of how we move forward. We stop being so insular as organisations, which may just have been us and a few other partners, but I feel like we need to kind of get into more of these spaces and be more vulnerable, be more open to kind of share where things have gone wrong, where we could collaborate. And this is really hard to do, but to try and find ways that we can be a bit less protective over funding, and think more collaboratively about how that funding can work for the benefit of all. And I think certainly locally, there's a lot of protectionism that happens, which is completely understandable because we're all trying to survive. But if we could find a way to get past that, and that's like, you know, the magic bullet, isn't it? You know, but if we could find a way to get past that, that would, you know, transform the way that we could deliver, I think.
Thank you. It's really, really inspiring and really good feedback. I'm glad that the type forms have been useful. I know what you mean though, like it's hard to say that, but it is, I don't make space for reflection until I have to do a task that requires reflection. It's kind of silly, but I completely know what you mean. Kerry, what were you going to say?
I think what Janine said, having that space and working with lottery has been quite refreshing, because normally you apply for your grant and they say, what do you expect to achieve in 3 years' time? And you just get so focused on that you have to achieve that in 3 years' time. And things change, things are different. Sorry, can you hear the motorbike? Things change and things are different, but you know, lotteries give us that confidence that if things do change and things are different, that we can come back, because you're not targeting us to some 3-year outcomes. You're saying, you know, this is a project and we want to work with you. So I think that's been really good, and we, you know, I think we all hope that that's the way forward in terms of funding as well.
Phoebe, I just add to in terms of using the space, enables us to, I guess, identify the common themes, because I think one of the things that we struggle with is sort of like not knowing what we don't know, but pretty convinced that most of the stuff we're dealing with probably someone else will be as well. And I don't know a clever way of ever doing that other than just talking to some people and sharing the challenge and being committed to finding a common solution. And I guess it's like everything, isn't it? You know, your partners are people that you ultimately feel some trust in, some alignment in, or whatever else it might be. So it doesn't have to be the whole sector, does it? It's just creating enough time and enough space for enough people to be sharing common challenges that will increase the amount of partnership working going forward. You know, you can build into the structure, you can insist on partnerships, you can insist on whatever else it might be as part of sort of funding criteria, but it's more about the initial motivation, isn't it, and time to do that. Like Janine says, just got to keep doing it.
Would you say if there was, like I'm hearing that as a funder, just having the reflection, the forms that encourage like learning and reflection has been really useful. Also just these monthly events, even if, you know, sometimes we've had kind of 40 or 50 people, sometimes it's smaller, but whoever shows up, just being able to hear some of these reflections and get that kind of sector-wide view, and just the space for sense making, which doesn't usually happen. But I'm wondering if there was a way to, maybe if there was funding available, if when you apply for funding, there was a kind of additional or like a little bit of budget that was earmarked within that funding for, convening or, just the time, like having an X number of conversations with others in the cohort or whatever it is, like finding ways to incentivize that. Because if it's not incentivized, we'd like, as funders and the sector, it'd be nice to just think, well, everyone will just do it because it's useful. But I think because you are all under so much strain, and like every hour counts, it's not going to happen if there's not actual protection of that time. And it's a funny one, because it's like that it's that common phrase, isn't it, that like to go fast you need to slow down. And there's something about that, like how do we create the spaces to slow down so that we can take those big strides as a sector? Pascal, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think it needs to happen at all levels. Like obviously there needs to be good modelling from leadership, but practitioners and people at all levels of organisations can benefit a whole lot from better coordination. And I think there's lots of tools available during COVID, and we're pretty guilty of that, to be honest. But some of our partners, what they're saying is it's really useful to have the right networks of the right with the right people. So then it's figuring out what to test, I think, and then we're just figuring out whether to set up a whole load of Slack channels for the refugee sector and see whether but we can't moderate them. So then it's like what gains traction and what's useful, because obviously how can you test something that's really low cost perhaps, and then maybe it just has its own, it kind of, if they're useful for people, I guess they'll be used. So I think but then it's also figuring out, we're doing so many new things at the moment, it's like we can't kind of keep hold of everything. So but I think, yeah, reflection rate is critical. It's just the first thing to go in the charity sector, because everyone's so busy, and you'll just spend, I'll put it into my monthly diary, and I don't know the last time I actually spent time learning in work. I might do it out of work, but it's almost like we're guilty. We need to change that mindset across the whole sector, that it's really valuable.
Simon?
Sorry, I was just struggling to unmute myself. I think that's really key, Pascal. So there's something for me around permission, and how do we give ourselves permission to do these things. And what you were saying about the Slack channels, whether it's a Slack channel or anything else, I mean, I'm a great fan of trying it and see what happens. But I think in order to get impact, we do need to think about how we set these things up and build community around them. So I think there've been a lot of experiments, and they've been useful experiments, but perhaps in the past 3 months, understandably, lots of things have been tried, but tried without probably quite enough underneath them to give them a good chance of starting to work. And so I think there's something around kind of community building, the basics, and I think that's what's worked really well about these sessions. And I mean, I'm not a grant holder, but I found them incredibly useful, reflecting kind of the work that I've gone back and done in the not-for-profit sector. I think just my final point, linking in headspace and permission, my biggest concern is the number of people I'm seeing that are actually quite close to burnout. And I think we need to be giving people permission to go on holiday. The work's never going to go away. The need's never going to go away. Your beneficiaries can't just put themselves on pause for a week or two. But if you don't put yourselves on pause for a week or two, you're not going to be able. So I'm generalizing, I know, but if people don't take the break more than a day or two, I think if people aren't genuinely going to have a week off at some point, then their effectiveness, their productivity, what they are going to be able to do in 3 to 6 months' time is just going to suffer. And that's not going to be good for the sector. It's not going to be good for them as individuals, the communities, their families. And that's my biggest fear. I think we need to be given permission to people to have a break, and we all need to be holding each other accountable to that.
Maybe there needs to be a holiday fund. That'd be great. A sector holiday fund. Apply here with your dream holiday, and we only give you funding if you actually take the time off and do go on holiday. I feel like, Simon, you're modelling that very well. You're already getting into the mood with your background. Oh no, anyway, I don't mean to make a joke out of it, but I do think that's a really good point, and that I think taking time off and resting is a big answer to a lot of the things that have come up as what's been hard. And actually our ability to think kind of creatively and effectively and actually build like long-term strategies definitely goes down with more and more stress. So yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of research around that shows that. Ben, were you jumping in there?
I was just thinking about sort of building the notion of incentivizing, and whether, paying people to engage, if we think that's a positive behavior. We used to talk, didn't we, in the pre-COVID days about the cost of engagement, and certainly for a small organisation that's really, really difficult. It's very expensive to be able to physically go to events, and we've talked today about how you don't have to do that anymore. But if we wanted to go sort of one step further and certainly sort of encourage organisations to take part in more of a kind of a partnership approach, then you could directly incentivise that behaviour, I suppose. I was thinking they had Mark Carney, didn't they, on the radio this morning, and he was talking about some kind of grand event that's happening, where thousands of people are all going to come together and think about climate change or something, and they're doing it for different motivations, but a lot of them are kind of corporate commercial entities, and so have different ways of funding that input. And if we as a sector think that's important, then maybe somehow we need to be putting our money where our mouth is as well in that sense. But I don't know how it possibly work, whether you a voucher scheme or something. You turn up and contribute to a particular partnership event, then you get paid something, goes into a slush fund. I don't know what it would be. We could go into sort of exchange schemes. You could go into all sorts of kind of like sort of, there's a risk of overcomplicating it, but equally, if we can monetize our time in a different way, perhaps there's something we can look at.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've been thinking a lot about what collaboration funds could look like, just ways of encouraging that. Pascal, have you got something to?
Just one last thing, and then I'll stop talking. I think it's like the grant the way that we're reporting with this fund is really refreshing, and I think if that kind of multiplies, then and actually grant people who give out grants and different funders, if they all move towards learning and growth and away from outputs, and the way we write our bids changes to reflect that, away from just the maximum we can achieve with the smallest amount of money, then hopefully, rather than, I think extra incentivization is really good. But, if we are more comfortable with bid writing as an activity for more of a holistic approach, where there is core funding, things like functions like learning can be supported. And whether we do those, whether we have roles that are cross sector that can support small organisations, so certain HR functions, bid writing, whether we're more creative around that would be good. But I think it goes back to the way we all compete for money, I suppose. And that it's become very output driven, which just sends people to burnout, because you're just trying to reach impossible targets and the need will never go away. And people want to meet the need in the charity sector. That's why people work in the sector for low pay and really high output, because we really believe in supporting our clients as much as we can.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to bring it back to Janine, Ben and Kerry, and just kind of open the floor for like closing comments. I realise actually, wait a second, we haven't really taken questions from the audience. Now I think about it, we just got so into the discussion. Perhaps if anybody from the audience does have a really burning question, or we could collect some questions which then Ben, Janine and Kerry can kind of respond to with like a final piece. So if anybody has a question they'd like to throw into the finishing moments, this is a chance. So just unmute and kind of ask away. Or put them in the chat as you wish. You can see Kat from Relate and Roz from Aberlour, and a couple other, well, actually quite a few grant holders. Fliss is here as well. If you've got any questions or provocations to contribute.
Can I just, I suppose, just make a comment about some of the contributions today, because I think it's been really great to hear about visibility, particularly around the charitable sector. I still don't, we still haven't cracked that at all, and I completely agree, Kerry. We should be, talking to some of our richer cousins about, well, what's out there for us to use cost-free to them, or what, and we haven't cracked it, and I'm not sure what the answer is, because I don't know why I'd be here today if we'd cracked that. I'd be doing clearly something else, but it isn't cracked in terms of visibility. There should be greater awareness outside of our sector of what we actually do, but I'm not sure that we are there yet. I think it's also around the use of the word vulnerable, and yes, being vulnerable as an organisation, because we've been so driven into competing against each other, and the idea of us being vulnerable enough to say, there's no competition, let's just do something good for the people that we're trying to serve. And you hear that all the time, but we've been channeled so much. And as individuals, we all talk about that vulnerability, but we're channeled through the structures that we're working towards, to be driven to be competitive against each other. And it's never felt right, and it will never feel right. But it is where we're at, and it's great to hear that there's real thinking about how we share and what we share, and actually getting somewhere because we're able to take away those shackles. I think it's great.
Okay, Kerry, do you want to start us off for the kind of final comments and then pass to Janine or Ben?
Yep, happy to. So in terms of agile working, I think the third sector has always been agile in its working. We respond to beneficiary needs first, and I think that's been the conflict between what we do and with the funding applications where we've got mid to long term funding. We want to be responsive, but we find that we can't, because these are the outcomes that we set right at the start. So we're great with agile. In terms of efficiency and best use of resources, I think the third sector's got it all going on. We could probably teach some corporates a lesson or two. So I think the question is, like you talked about, Kat, there is, how can we monetize from that with that corporate world? How can they share their products that they spend millions on, because they make millions of profit on the back of them, with our efficiency and how we engage with we call them beneficiaries, they call them customers, yeah, because we're really good at responding to that need and being really agile. Pascal asked a question before about, do I set up a Slack channel? Will it work? Somebody's probably already done it. Where do we put that shared learning, yeah, for other people? Our beneficiaries are probably already doing it in WhatsApp or Slack. How do we utilize them to share that learning, and then we can monetize from that, which goes right back into what we provide to our beneficiaries. But yeah, how do we shout much louder? In terms of what's been hard, it's been hard, it's going to be hard, it's going to get harder. So how do we pull in those outside externals to make it less hard for us? And the model of the lottery is really good. I think it's, you know, the way forward, and I hope other funders look to that and kind of slacken it off a little bit. We've all sat there in front of a funder going, yeah, we'll do that, you know, when actually we're dying just to say that's not what our beneficiaries need anymore. So yeah, that's, for me, that's my closer. In terms of the what's been hard, we've also used that throughout the organisation. So we did some digital work the other week with staff, how to use Jamboards, and what we said was, what's been hard, put it on a post-it note, stick it on the Jamboard. So even these themes that the lottery have, we can utilise those as an organisation to engage with our staff and allow them to say what's been hard as well. And, you know, I don't doubt for a second at some point we're going to put it back to our beneficiaries as well, what's been hard for them. And that's what we need to be hearing. That's what we need to be pushing back out there.
Thank you, Kerry. I just wanted to make it clear that the way we've been doing funding is not like that throughout the lottery. It's just the digital fund. So there are plenty of other funds that do it in a different way. Over to you, Janine or Ben, whoever wants to go first. Maybe Ben, because Janine went first.
So I guess it's sort of just two sides of a coin, really. So again, sort of Stephen's point about moving from service, building around services to something around end users. And I guess for us as an organisation, that was where we started our journey on the digital fund, was this thing about how do you start and listen better to most of the beneficiaries and respond to them. And I guess my sort of sense of our challenge now is sort of, without meaning to sound ungrateful to the world, really, is that we've kind of made this shift overnight to delivering services in a digital way, you know, the loosest definition of the term. So our starting point has been sort of super drived, you know, so we're completely in a different place as an organisation, but I think we're still thinking in a rather old fashioned way. So our discussions internally are about how do we make the existing experience more effective in a digital space. And so we're talking about online booking, we're talking about you know, whether it should be Zoom, whether it should be another platform and stuff. So we, in one way we've moved, but in another we haven't. So we're still focused on our own services. We're still focused. And so it's kind of how do we all keep kind of nudging each other? How do we keep ourselves honest? It's Kerry's point really about the beneficiaries, and it's how do we all support each other to do that? Because otherwise we'll just kind of keep trying to problem solve rather than listen to the end users and actually respond in a different way. And I think that's what the opportunity for tech and digital should be about.
Janine, over to you.
Yeah, I'd echo what Kerry said about, you know, how do we shout, how do we lever more and monetize and more into the sector, which is a really deserving sector, and like you said, has masses going for it. And also Ben about kind of being more user driven, which is a lot of our journey as well, actually, at the Carer Centre, about how do we kind of embed that across our teams. And I guess my final point, because I've said quite a lot, is God, it has been a hard few months. Like, it's been really hard. And I think the thing that drives me, apart from like really wanting to do the best for carers, is like, it's been so hard. Like, I have to make something good out of this. Like, I have to learn from what's been hard, and I have to make it better moving forward, because that will mean that it hasn't all been for nothing, and it hasn't just been a slog. And events like this and thinking like that I'm hearing here, I find really inspirational, because it makes me feel like we're not necessarily in 3 months going to solve all of the problems of the charity sector, but at least there are people kind of thinking and trying to drive everything in that really positive direction. And that makes me really happy. That's it.
Thank you, Janine. Yeah, I think, and as a kind of closing thought, I just think there was a point at one point in the webinar, somebody said, like, I just want to know, I think it was you, Janine, I want to know that our beneficiaries, like someone else has their backs as well. And I think that's just really important, that none of you or anyone feels like they should be saving the day. And like all of this language around like NHS heroes has been really unhelpful in a way, because, you know, it shouldn't be like that. It's not about heroism. That's just a lot of pressure. So yeah, please take care of yourselves and don't feel like you are battling alone and should have to save the day. And thank you so much for all the incredible work that you do. And thank you for joining us, and thank you so much to our panelists for taking the time, and rolling with questions that came up in the panel. And thank you to everybody else who's here. Cheers for coming along and for your questions and input, and hope to see you next month. I think the date of the next month is around the 20th, Monday 20th of, if there is a Monday that is the 20th, then that is the one. If it's on a Monday and it's near the 20th, so hope to see you then. And the theme will be on collaboration, actually, so there'll be a lot to build on the themes that came from today. Thanks so much, and see you next month.
Great stuff. Thanks, Phoebe.
Thanks.
Have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.